Behind the glittering mask of England's most iconic monarch lurked a terror almost no one was allowed to see. The woman who crushed the Spanish Armada, who presided over a golden age, and who sat at the very apex of European power was, in her final years, being devoured by a nightmare she herself had helped create. This is not the tale of Elizabeth the Queen. 028, this is the story of Elizabeth the woman, and the slow, grotesque unraveling that turned her last decade into a living Gothic horror of vanity, poison, and bodily collapse. Imagine the year 1603. Inside the icy stone corridors of Richmond Palace, courtiers speak only in whispers. No one dares meet the eyes of the figure on the throne. What sits there no longer matches the flawless, godlike image that has been sold to the world for almost 50 years. The crown is still hers. 1 o'clock, yet beneath the jewels, the silk, the enormous ruffs, and the mountains of fabric, something unspeakable is taking place. The Virgin Queen, who swore her body belonged to the nation and the nation alone, is now being betrayed by that same body in ways too hideous to describe in public. What the world was shown had been meticulously staged. 124, official portraits presented an immortal beauty, skin like alabaster, gaze serene and all-commanding. Those portraits were lies, deliberate, necessary lies, but lies all the same. The Real Elizabeth lived behind locked doors, behind a shell of cosmetics so thick it formed an actual mask, behind a wall of silence that thickened with every year. 150, anyone who accidentally glimpsed what lay underneath usually wished they hadn't. They carried away images burned into their nightmares, pictures of decay that felt almost demonic in its relentlessness. This was not ordinary aging that visits every human being, no matter how exalted. 212, this was something far darker, a gradual self-poisoning that started with the pursuit of eternal youth and ended in living rot. The very pastes and pigments Elizabeth slathered on to preserve her legendary beauty were eating her alive from the outside in, gnawing at her flesh, poisoning her blood, and quite possibly shattering her mind. And the worst part? She knew. 242, that may be the deepest tragedy of all. She understood exactly what was happening, yet she could not bring herself to stop. The destruction was not sudden. It crept in during her middle years and gathered speed as she neared 70. 301, every morning brought fresh horrors, fresh patches of ruined flesh that had to be hidden, fresh waves of pain that had to be borne without a sound. Elizabeth, who had outlasted assassination attempts, religious wars, and court conspiracies that would have broken lesser rulers, now found herself locked in a far more intimate war, one she was losing against her own decaying body. 326, and unlike traitors who could be imprisoned or beheaded, this enemy could not be bargained with or killed. Her doctors, the handful allowed to examine her, spoke in careful riddles when questioned. They hid behind vague phrases and outdated jargon. But their private notes, uncovered centuries later, paint a very different picture. They record deterioration so extreme that it would shock us in any patient, let alone a reigning queen. 352, they describe a woman literally rotting while still alive. Yet somehow she kept ruling. She still received foreign ambassadors, signed documents, projected iron strength, even as her flesh betrayed her at every turn. For 22, that took a willpower that almost defies comprehension, a stubbornness that tipped into the pathological. Every public appearance became theater of the highest order. Every smile was paint on a painted face. The sheer effort of keeping up the illusion began to eat away at her mind as surely as the poisons ate her body. For 44, she grew more isolated, more paranoid, more addicted to the very substances that were killing her. What follows is the hidden story, pieced together from letters, medical records, eyewitness testimonies, and documents that strip away the polished myth and reveal a nightmare most history books still refuse to print. 513, this is the tale of how vanity turned into obsession, obsession into poison, and poison into a walking corpse wearing a crown. This is the story of Elizabeth I's last years and the appalling price she paid to stay forever young in the eyes of her people. In the end, that proud crown was nothing more than jewelry resting on a crumbling monument to human pride and the unstoppable march of death. 544, to grasp the full horror, we first have to understand the beauty culture of Tudor England and the crushing pressure on royal women to look eternally perfect. Beauty was never just personal preference, it was political capital, proof of God's favor, evidence that you deserved to rule. 610, For Elizabeth, who built her entire authority on the myth of the Virgin Queen, visible aging was not merely embarrassing, it was political suicide. To look old was to look weak, mortal, replaceable. So the cosmetics of the age became weapons in a desperate war against time, and like all weapons, they were lethal to the person wielding them. 637. The core of every noblewoman's routine was ceruse, also called Venetian Ceruse or spirits of Saturn, a thick white paste made from lead carbonate and vinegar. Applied daily, it produced a ghostly pale skin that screamed rank and refinement. It looked flawless. It was also slow-acting death. 709. Lead seeps through the skin and accumulates in bones and organs. At first it brings headaches, stomach trouble, bad temper. Later come tremors, memory loss, madness, organ failure. Worst of all, it destroys the very thing it is meant to perfect. The skin turns dry, grey, and deeply lined, the face collapses into a haggard mask. 804. Elizabeth started heavy ceruse use in her 30s. By her 50s the toll was obvious to anyone who saw her unmasked. What began as small blemishes that powder could hide turned into raw, weeping sores and permanent scarring. But the poison had created a vicious loop. The worse her skin became, the thicker she had to plaster the ceruse to hide it, and the thicker the layer, the worse the damage grew. 849. Soon she was not wearing makeup. She was wearing armor made of poison. Each morning her ladies spent hours building the mask, swearing oaths of silence about the horror they saw underneath. Beneath the white shell her face had become a battlefield of open wounds, scabs, and scar tissue. Modern experts believe she suffered severe contact dermatitis, ulceration, even precancerous lesions, all sandblasted daily by the very paste meant to save her. 950. To give color to that death pale base she used Vermilion, mercury sulfide, for lips and cheeks. Mercury brings its own madness, shaking, mood storms, brain fog. She was painting insanity directly onto the most absorbent skin on her face. 1037. For sparkling, youthful eyes she used Belladonna drops, atropine distilled from deadly nightshade. The pupils dilated, the gaze looked innocent and huge, but the price was blurred vision, racing heart, and hallucinations. Some scholars think her later difficulty reading state papers came as much from belladonna as from age. 1152, and then there were her teeth, perhaps the most closely guarded secret of the entire reign. What was happening inside her mouth was pure grotesque. Blackened stumps, exposed roots, abscesses that turned every breath into agony and every smile into something she refused to show. Courtiers learned to stand well back, the stench was unbearable. 1244, sugar, newly arrived from the colonies, was Elizabeth's addiction. She devoured candied fruits, marchpane, sugar sculptures by the banquet load. Tudor England had no dentistry. Sugar-fed acid that drilled straight through enamel. By her late 50s most of her teeth were gone or rotting to the nerve. 1358, a German visitor in 1597 politely noted, her teeth are very yellow and unequal, many missing. Private accounts are far worse, black fangs, cavities down to the jawbone, pus-filled swellings. Abscess pain is often described as worse than childbirth. Elizabeth lived with several at once. 1444, extraction was barbaric, no anesthetic, just strong men holding her down while a barber surgeon wrenched the tooth out with pliers. Bone fragments and splinters of tooth were often left behind to fester. She was terrified of the procedure. In 1578 she only agreed after watching a bishop have a healthy tooth ripped out first to prove it was bearable. Her screams echoed through the palace. 1621, losing so many teeth collapsed her lower face inward and gave her a pronounced lisp. She slowed her speech, chose words carefully, and eventually preferred written orders. In public she stuffed cloth rolls into her cheeks to fill out the hollows, holding them in place with tongue and muscle while she spoke or ate. The indignity, for a woman once famed for her beauty and eloquence, is almost unimaginable. 1802, untreated abscesses seeded bacteria into her bloodstream. Modern analysis of her symptoms, recurring high fevers, swollen face, delirium, points strongly to repeated septicemia. Each episode left her weaker, damaged her organs, accelerated the collapse. 2034, chronic skin infections, gynecological corruptions of the womb, constant inflammation, all fed by a body whose natural barriers had been destroyed by decades of poison and neglect. She lived in permanent low-grade war with her own flesh. 2358. Pain exhausts the mind. Chronic agony, chronic poison, chronic terror of exposure turned a once sharp intellect irritable, suspicious, explosive. The same lead and mercury that ate her skin were now eating her brain. 25:14. Lead encephalopathy brings depression, paranoia, hallucinations. Mercury brings tremors and psychotic breaks. By her 60s she was obsessed with mirrors, yet screamed at her reflection, then banished every mirror from her rooms. She slept with a sword beside her bed, convinced assassins hid in the shadows. She flew into rages so violent she clawed her own face and tore out clumps of hair. 29:34. Insomnia tormented her. She paced at night talking to the dead, Henry VIII, and Boleyn, Mary Queen of Scots. When sleep finally came, nightmares woke the entire household with her screams. 31:01. The glittering court turned into a tomb of whispers. The queen who once danced till dawn now rarely appeared. When she did, every detail was stage-managed. The rest of the time she hid behind locked doors, attended only by a handful of women sworn to eternal silence. 32:18. Those women carried an awful burden. Every morning they rebuilt the mask over open sores and infection, arranged the wigs, her own hair had thinned to nothing, stuffed cloth into her cheeks, all while pretending the woman in front of them was still the radiant virgin of the portraits. 36:48. Treatments only made it worse, endless bloodletting that left her anemic, mercury and arsenic ointments, pearl paste that cost a fortune and did nothing, even cordial supposedly made from the blood of young men. She tried everything except the one thing that might have saved her, stopping the poison makeup. 42:00. Doctors hinted. She refused. To appear without the mask would destroy the myth on which her authority rested. She would rather die by inches than rule as an old woman. 42:43. By early 1603 the end was obvious. The death of her last close friend, the Countess of Nottingham, broke whatever remained of her will. She took to the floor, refusing bed or food, sitting on cushions for days, makeup abandoned, true face finally exposed to horrified attendants, grey, scarred, sunken, monstrous. 44:27. She spoke to ghosts, confessed regrets, rambled about the loneliness of the crown. On the 24th of March 1603 she died, still refusing to name an heir clearly, still controlling the stage to the last breath. 47:59. Even in death the performance continued. Embalmers had to reapply thick ceruse to a corpse whose skin tore at the touch, rebuild the mask one final time so the public would see only the eternal Virgin Queen. She was buried looking flawless, the horror sealed forever inside Westminster stone. 51:51. The tomb shows a serene, majestic figure. It lies. Beneath the marble lies the truth, a brilliant woman who chose image over life, myth over flesh, and paid for it with decades of slow, self-inflicted torment. That is the real legacy of Elizabeth I, not just the Golden Age and the defeated Armada, but the unspoken, unbearable price of refusing to age while the world watched. She ruled until the end, crown straight, mask perfect, body rotting beneath it all. And in that terrible, magnificent refusal to yield, she remains unforgettable.